This show is part of OnePlace, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to the program. We're diving into a packed agenda today, covering everything from major shifts in immigration policy to the rising tensions and costs surrounding the ongoing conflict in Iran.
U.S. refugee admissions now focus almost exclusively on South Africans.
Republicans face internal battles over funding the Iran war.
Military members are increasingly seeking conscientious objector status today.
Melania Trump denies knowing Jeffrey Epstein and seeks hearings.
White House staff are warned against using prediction markets.
The First Lady clarifies her past correspondence with Maxwell.
Democrats attempt to force a vote on war powers.
A hospital chain collapse leaves patients without malpractice coverage.
Let's start with immigration. The landscape of American refugee resettlement has undergone a staggering transformation under President Trump's latest policy overhaul. Recent government data reveals that since October, the United States has admitted 4,499 refugees, and remarkably, all but 3 of them were from South Africa. This represents a massive departure from the previous administration's final year, where 125,000 people from 85 different countries were welcomed. The current focus is specifically on Afrikaners, a white minority group that the president claims is facing severe persecution and even genocide. While the South African government and various international observers have strongly disputed these claims of genocide, the U.S. State Department maintains that this humanitarian initiative is a priority for national security. This shift has caused significant diplomatic friction between Washington and Pretoria, especially after the expulsion of South Africa's ambassador last year.
The tension reached a boiling point during a meeting in the Oval Office this past May, where President Trump directly confronted President Cyril Ramaphosa about the alleged targeting of white farmers. Despite Ramaphosa and even white political leaders in South Africa refuting these assertions, the U.S. has continued to prioritize Afrikaner applications. Critics argue that this policy ignores refugees from active war zones who were previously eligible for resettlement. The South African government has been vocal in its criticism, pointing to an open letter from prominent Afrikaner academics and business people who argue that the narrative of white genocide lacks reliable evidence. Nevertheless, the Trump administration remains steadfast, framing the move as a way to protect victims of what they call unjust discrimination. This policy shift effectively narrows the door to the U.S. for thousands of others seeking safety from global conflicts.
Next, the war's cost. As the conflict between the United States and Iran continues to escalate, Republicans in Congress are preparing for a difficult internal battle over the war's rapidly growing price tag. When lawmakers return from their recess next week, they will face the daunting task of securing funding for a war that some estimates suggest has already cost nearly $30 billion. The political peril is high, as the GOP must navigate not only opposition from Democrats, but also significant skepticism from within their own ranks. A major complication is the lack of a detailed breakdown from the White House regarding current expenditures or the total amount of additional funding required. Furthermore, the clock is ticking under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which mandates that military operations must cease after 60 days unless Congress provides explicit approval for the continuation of hostilities.
Several prominent Republican senators have already voiced their concerns publicly. Senator Susan Collins of Maine has been particularly critical, calling the president's war remarks incendiary and demanding a swift end to the conflict. She has stated she will not vote to extend the mission or authorize ground troops without a dramatic change in circumstances. Similarly, Senator John Curtis of Utah has cited both historical and constitutional reasons for refusing to support ongoing military action beyond the 60-day window without a formal vote. This growing dissent among moderates like Tom Tillis and Todd Young suggests that the administration cannot take congressional support for granted. The upcoming legislative session will be a critical test of party unity, as leadership tries to bridge the gap between the president's military objectives and the fiscal and legal concerns of a wary Congress.
Now to the military. The ongoing war with Iran is not just a financial and political burden, it is also creating a profound sense of disquiet within the ranks of the U.S. military. Organizations like the Center on Conscience and War have reported a significant surge in calls to the GI Rights Hotline, with many service members inquiring about how to apply for conscientious objector status. In March alone, the center took on more than 80 new clients, which is nearly double their typical annual intake. While these numbers are small compared to the 1.3 million active duty personnel, experts see them as a clear indicator of crumbling morale and deep-seated ethical concerns. One Army career counselor, speaking anonymously, noted that retention is failing as institutional knowledge walks out the door. The cultural and political shifts under the current administration are frequently cited as primary reasons for this desire to leave.
This trend is particularly concerning because the military had only recently begun to recover from a recruitment slump following the pandemic. While the Pentagon reported meeting recruitment targets in December, the loss of experienced personnel through poor retention can be devastating to operational readiness. Service members are using the hotline to air frustrations without fear of immediate repercussions, often describing a sense of disillusionment with the current conflict. The process of becoming a conscientious objector is notoriously difficult and invasive, yet the fact that so many are willing to pursue it speaks volumes about the level of internal dissent. As the war drags on, the military faces a dual challenge: maintaining its strength on the battlefield while addressing the growing psychological and ethical rift among the men and women who are expected to carry out the mission.
Moving to the First Lady. First Lady Melania Trump made a surprise appearance at the White House this week to forcefully deny any substantial connection to the late Jeffrey Epstein. She addressed long-standing rumors, specifically refuting the claim that Epstein was the one who introduced her to Donald Trump. Calling these allegations mean-spirited attempts to defame her reputation, she insisted that any links between her and the convicted sex trafficker need to end immediately. In an unexpected move, she also called for Congress to hold public hearings for the survivors of Epstein's crimes, emphasizing that these women deserve a platform to testify under oath. While she admitted to briefly crossing paths with Epstein in 2000, she maintained that she had no knowledge of his illegal activities and was never a participant in his social circle. This intervention has sparked a mixed reaction from survivors and political observers alike.
The timing and motivation behind the First Lady's statement remains somewhat mysterious. President Trump told reporters he was unaware his wife would be making the announcement, though a spokesperson later suggested he knew she would speak, but perhaps not the specific topic. Melania also addressed a 2002 email to Ghislaine Maxwell that surfaced in the Epstein files. She characterized the message, which included compliments about a magazine story and a friendly sign-off, as nothing more than casual and polite correspondence. However, the magazine article in question featured quotes from Donald Trump praising Epstein as a terrific guy who enjoyed the company of younger women. While the First Lady seeks to distance herself and support the victims, the resurfacing of these old connections continues to draw public scrutiny. Her call for congressional action puts the spotlight back on a dark chapter of high society scandal.
Next, prediction market rules. The White House has issued a stern warning to its staff regarding the use of insider information on prediction markets like Kalshi and Polymarket. An internal email sent in late March reminded employees that federal ethics guidelines strictly prohibit using non-public information for financial gain. This warning followed reports of suspicious betting activity, particularly around the president's military decisions. For instance, a gambler on Polymarket made nearly $500,000 by betting on the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro just moments before it was officially announced. Similar concerns arose when the president announced a pause on threats against Iranian infrastructure, leading to questions about whether government officials were profiting from their knowledge of sensitive diplomatic and military moves. The White House spokesperson dismissed these implications as baseless, but reiterated that the president's only interest is the American people's well-being.
The rise of prediction markets, which now host over $44 billion in trades, has triggered a broader debate about regulation and ethics. These platforms allow users to bet on everything, from interest rate hikes to the outcomes of local elections and even the duration of wars. Democratic lawmakers, including Congressman Richie Torres and Senator Andy Kim, are pushing for stricter oversight and even a total ban on betting related to military action. They argue that the current system is rife with loopholes that allow for corruption and exploitation. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission is now being urged to investigate suspicious trades that seem to anticipate major policy shifts. As these markets grow in popularity, the potential for conflict of interest among those with access to state secrets becomes a significant concern for both the administration and legislative watchdogs.
Back to Melania's statement. In her rare public statement, Melania Trump went beyond a simple denial of her own involvement with Jeffrey Epstein by explicitly calling for a congressional forum for his victims. She stated firmly that she is not a victim of Epstein and had no knowledge of his abuses, but she emphasized that Epstein did not act alone. By urging Congress to provide a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors, she is positioning herself as an advocate for those harmed by the financier's sex trafficking ring. This move comes at a sensitive time, as the Department of Justice recently announced that former Attorney General Pam Bondi would not appear for a subpoena regarding her handling of Epstein-related documents. The First Lady's insistence that victims be given the opportunity to testify under oath adds a new layer of pressure on lawmakers to revisit the case.
The First Lady's name has appeared in the latest tranche of documents released by the Justice Department, which included a redacted FBI interview claiming Epstein introduced the Trumps. Melania's statement was a direct attempt to set the record straight, from her perspective, especially regarding her past interactions with Ghislaine Maxwell. She described her emails to Maxwell as trivial and polite, rather than an indication of a deep friendship. Meanwhile, the president has also denied any wrongdoing, despite his past public praise for Epstein before their eventual falling out. An NPR investigation recently found that some documents naming the president were initially withheld from public files, further fueling the controversy. By speaking out now, Melania Trump is attempting to control the narrative and distance the first family from the ongoing revelations, while simultaneously championing the rights of the survivors to be heard.
Now, the House battle. On Capitol Hill, Democrats recently attempted a bold maneuver to force a vote on the Iran war during a pro forma session of the House. While both chambers are technically on vacation, these brief sessions are held to fulfill procedural requirements. Representative Glenn Ivey tried to interrupt the proceedings to demand a vote on a war powers resolution, but he was quickly shut down by the Republican presiding officer. Despite the failure of the motion, Democrats used the moment to create a public spectacle, speaking to reporters on the House steps about the need for Congress to fulfill its constitutional responsibility. They argue that the president's recent rhetoric, including a profane social media post about the Strait of Hormuz and threats of total destruction, has fundamentally changed the political landscape and necessitates an immediate legislative check on executive power.
The silence from top Republican leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been noted by many, as even some members of their own party have condemned the president's more extreme threats. Representative Mary Gay Scanlon pointed out that constituents across the political spectrum were shocked by the language used in the president's Easter messages. While a previous attempt to end the conflict was defeated last month, Democrats believe the shifting tide of public and political opinion might lead to a different result when the House reconvenes next week. They are planning to force another vote on a war disapproval resolution, hoping to pick up more Republican support. The big question remains whether the recent escalation in rhetoric will be enough to convince a majority of lawmakers to assert their authority over the nation's military engagements.
Finally, the hospital collapse. The collapse of Prospect Medical, a for-profit hospital chain, has left a trail of devastation across 6 states, but a new and particularly troubling detail has recently emerged. Court filings from the company's bankruptcy proceedings show that Prospect failed to set aside any money for malpractice insurance, despite promising to cover its hospitals and doctors. This means that hundreds of patients with pending negligence cases may never receive any compensation for their injuries. One such patient is Pamela Dorn, whose husband died after being left unattended with solid food despite having severe dementia. Her lawsuit has stalled because there are no funds available to pay out a settlement or judgment. This situation highlights a dangerous gap in healthcare regulation, as Prospect was not legally required to prove it had the financial means to cover its potential malpractice liabilities before operating.
Prospect Medical's downfall follows a period of aggressive, debt-fueled expansion led by private equity investors. During its growth to 17 hospitals, the company was repeatedly cited for unsanitary conditions and poor infection control. It also owed over $135 million in unpaid taxes and failed to pay vendors for essential medical supplies. The closure of 4 safety net hospitals in Pennsylvania led to thousands of layoffs and left vulnerable communities without easy access to care. Now, the revelation that the company self-insured without actually reserving funds has left former employees and patients in a legal limbo. For families like the Dorns, the lack of accountability is a second trauma. As the bankruptcy case continues, the story of Prospect Medical serves as a grim warning about the risks of prioritizing private profit over the basic safety and legal protections of patients in the healthcare system.
That wraps up our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us as we navigate these complex stories.
Be sure to follow us for your next daily update. We will see you back here tomorrow with more focused coverage on the news that matters most.